Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to today's program on UCLA Slang and Beyond with Professor Pam Munro. My name is Lam Liu. I'm a retiree resource specialist at the UCLA Emeriti Retirees Relations Center. Our office reports to the Vice Chancellor of Academic Personnel and serve over 16,000 retired faculty, staff, campus, and community partners. Our staff is composed of our director, Aisha Dixon, my colleague, Maria Lubrano, and myself. Aisha and Maria couldn't make it today, but they send their regards. I just want to take care of a few things first. Everyone is going to be muted out of courtesy to our speaker, but Professor Munro would like to have a more engaged and lively interaction. So once there's space for it, I will be allowing everyone to unmute themselves and to speak. You can also type in the chat if you have anything to add or questions. This program will be recorded and archived to our YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed yet, I will be linking it in the chat. I will also send a link to the video and the slides in an email afterwards. And on another note, today's topic is on slang, and slang it's informal, it's unrestricted, it may be explicit, so viewer discretion is advised. And without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to our partners, Michael Heafy from the Retirees Association and Steve Cedarbaum from the Emeriti Association.
Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to introduce Pam Munro. I have to tell you, she doesn't know this. I became familiar with Pam 35 years ago. My daughter was about 12, and I was wandering around the bookstore in Acronyms, and I ran across this book called Slang U. And it was about the age when you try to engage your children in increasingly adult or age appropriate interactions. And I looked at the book, and it was a little bit edgy, and I thought that's a way to begin a dialogue on more adult subjects. So I bought this book for my daughter, who just loved it. It was a book of slang that Professor Munro had accumulated from her students. Oh, that's it. That was it. And it was very funny. The thing I remember most is there were about 50 different words for vomit. It was extremely engaging and surprising. I didn't think that the language was that rich. But things, I just didn't think about Professor Munro until about 2 or 3 months ago, when we had a reception for faculty, retired faculty, emeriti, who had won awards for their productivity during their retirement years. And Professor Munro was one of those people who was awarded for her work in a variety of Mesoamerican indigenous languages. But it seemed, quite contrasting with Slang U. But then Professor Munro engaged in her acceptance talk. I wouldn't call it a speech exactly. And she was so engaging that immediately there was an uproar. We said, we've got to get this person to speak in our after lunch seminar series. So here she is. She's going to talk about the newest version of Slang U, and really the stuff that the kids in undergraduate UCLA today, undergraduates at UCLA today, are using to communicate with one another and less frequently with us. Pam, take it away.
Michael, are you going to say something too?
Right now, we thank you, Pam and Stephen, and let's get on with this.
Okay,
Please.
great. Am I able to share my screen? Let's see.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
There it is. Thumbs up.
Okay. So let's see. I'm really happy to be here. It was an honor to be asked to speak to you guys, and I look forward to amusing you and entertaining you, and possibly even helping you learn some things. Let's see. Here's a roadmap of what I'm going to do in today's talk. I'm just trying to change this so that I can make sure I can see the whole screen. I think I want to take it off full screen. Oops. Sorry. Okay, I don't seem to be able to exit full screen.
Can you click escape?
I am clicking escape and nothing's happening. I want to be able to make sure that I can see some of my slides go over to the right edge, and maybe I'll just hide all your videos. I'm sorry to say that.
That's okay.
Okay. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start by talking about the projects at UCLA that Stephen said a little bit about, and talk about what slang is, and consider 3 myths about slang. And of course, some myths have some truth to them. And then I'm going to talk about the project that I did last quarter and issues involved with making a slang dictionary, like the Slang U book that Steve talked about. And then finally go on to talk about studying slang and dictionaries as a way to learn about grammar. There were 2 basic UCLA slang projects. The first one is a large longitudinal database of things submitted by students in 33 Linguistics 110, which is historical linguistics, Linguistics 1, and other UCLA linguistics classes since 1983, which is when I started this project. And most recently, the winter 2022 Linguistics 1 class, which was taught by my colleague, Giuseppina Silvestri. And I'll talk more about them and what I did with them. So then, in addition, after I had been doing that a few years, I started teaching undergraduate seminars on slang, during which students assembled collections of words, which we turned into departmental publications. But the first one actually got a very brief mention in the New York Times. And the next day after it was mentioned in the New York Times, I had 3 New York publishers battling for the right to publish it. And, you know, if you ever want to write a book that's a sort of popular book, get mentioned in the New York Times. And this is apparently the best way to get a book contract. So for that one, the UCLA slang book that Steve mentioned was commercially published by a publisher. And what happened was I got the students who had worked on the little collection for UCLA back. We added to it. We took out UCLA specific references, like references to places on campus and nicknames for sororities and fraternities and things like that. And it was published. We were hoping to make a lot of money on it, but unfortunately it came out during the first Gulf War, and humor books don't sell well during a war. That's probably going on right now. And so it did not, we didn't make more than the advance, but both I and all the students who worked on it made a little bit of money, and it was fun. So those are the 2 projects. Let's talk about what slang is. Slang is informal or colloquial or casual speech or some variety of this, as used by a particular group. So slang may have important social and even political functions as a way for people to recognize other members of their group or to show solidarity. And there are lots of varieties of English slang. Our projects studied UCLA slang in particular, and more generally college slang. Slang isn't the same as any other particular variety or dialect of English, including African American English, although it does draw on that variety. Every language has slang. My colleague Connie Ebley from the University of North Carolina had a video conference one time. This was in long pre-Zoom days with one of my classes, and she said, "Slang is a mark of culture," which I think is such a great quote. And every speaker of slang knows when to code switch between formal and informal varieties of language. So that's why you don't get very many papers turned into you written in slang, even though you're going to be learning a lot of really quite unusual words that students know. So first of all, I'm going to talk about 3 myths about slang. So the first one is slang is more vulgar than standard English. So if Steve was telling the truth, my guess would be that in addition to seeing lots of words for vomiting, he probably saw some other words that he was kind of surprised by. I think probably most of you who've been around LA for a long time remember Jack Smith of the LA Times. He reviewed our first slang book that was published by the department and said that it talked too much about boozing, barfing, and bumping. And he wondered why. And my feeling is that it's because UCLA students work very hard in high school when they're living at home, and then they come to college and most of them are living in the dorm. And even if they don't booze, barf, and bump, they see a lot of it going on and they want to talk about it. So, you know, it's just people talk about what they know. So Chapman's Dictionary of American Slang, which is really quite old now, but I haven't found any revision of it. He identifies both vulgar and taboo words, and he tries to mark them in his dictionary. In my classes at UCLA, I found that there are basically 3 types of words that might be considered offensive. So there are bad words, which are probably vulgar or taboo. There are blasphemous words. These are words that refer inappropriately to religious items. And then there are epithets, which are hurtful names for people from different ethnic, social, gender, sexual orientation, or other groups. And the first 2 categories are about all that Chapman talks about. And if you look at other people talking about offensive language, those are the big categories. But UCLA students are most likely to be concerned by the 3rd type of offensiveness. And maybe they're more sensitive or maybe politically correct than many older speakers. So in our dictionaries, we sort of vote on whether words are offensive or not. And the ones that are most likely to become marked as offensive are words in this 3rd category. So slang is, I think I skipped, did I skip? No, it's later. The second myth is slang is less grammatical than standard English. And it's actually true that slang words can be analyzed according to their part of speech, just like standard words. And speakers follow grammatical rules when using slang, just as they do when using formal language. But slang words may differ substantially in their meaning and usage from the identical standard words. So I'm going to give you some examples of that just to ease into slang. And once again, almost all the examples I'm going to give today are from this collection from last quarter. So they're very up to the minute. Some of them are words that have been around for a long time, but many of them are words that I did not know before I did last quarter's project. So that rapper's performance last night was so dope. In standard English, dope can be a noun or a verb, but not an adjective. But in UCLA slang, dope means cool or awesome. I'm so hungry, I'm about to body this burrito. In standard English, body is a noun, not a verb. But in UCLA slang, body means to destroy. The food at Cafe 1919 smacks. In standard English, the verb smack refers to an action, not a state. But at UCLA slang, smack means to taste really good. I totally stans Taylor Swift. In standard English, stan is a name, not a verb. But in UCLA slang, stan means to be a big fan of. But both slang at UCLA and standard usage follow just about the same rules of grammar. Myth 3, slang changes much faster than standard English. People often use the word ephemeral about slang. And here are two word expressions from the very first project that I did, which was in a large historical linguistics class in 1983. So you may remember that you probably heard people saying, gag me with a spoon, if you've been around LA for a long time, or even other places in the country. But you may not have realized that this was something that UCLA students actually believed was a good thing to say, to mean, you know, I'm really surprised or shocked or something. And that expression died very, very quickly. But then there was this other expression that I've never heard before or since, two spellings of clearly the same example, same word meaning interesting. Nobody has volunteered this word other than these two students since 1983. So that's really ephemeral. But some slang expressions remain unchanged for very long periods of time. So mooch dates from before the time of Shakespeare and apparently has been similarly considered as slang for hundreds of years. Okay, so the meaning of slang expressions can change very rapidly or can vary considerably. So I'm not going to go through all of these. You can look at them. You'll see these are words that came from my earliest collection from the many classes during which I collected a little bit of slang, and then students did a project on it, to the longer, the actual classes that were devoted to slang. But you can see each of these words, many of which you've heard before, maybe not all of them. These words change their meaning quite quickly, although some of them, you know, can retain the same meaning for a long time. The last time I did one of these big projects was in 2009. So you'll see, like, for instance, in talking about stoked here, I'm sorry. I have to stop my share for a minute so I can get off of full screen. I just can't handle this when I can't see this. Oh, darn, it's still full screen. I don't understand how to, okay, never mind. Okay, I'll do the best I can. So an interesting type of semantic change in slang is for a word that names a negative concept in standard language to acquire a positive connotation in slang. So in addition to sick and dank words there, we have current examples like bad, disgusting, dripping, sickening, and tough. These are all words that that have, in standard language, they have a negative connotation, whereas in slang, they have a highly positive connotation. This is a really common type of change, but I have no examples of the opposite development for some reason or other. Here's one example of extremely fast semantic change that also is related to the trend that students may be more sensitive to unfair characterization of groups than the wider speech community. So I'm sure you all know this word from Wikipedia. This Karen is defined as, or they say Karen is a pejorative term for a white woman perceived as entitled or demanding. Depictions may include demanding to speak to the manager or being racist. So 4 students' definitions that came up in my collection from this year's class. So 2 people said middle-aged white woman who feels entitled and acts obnoxious, rude, or racist, or wants to get into other people's business. One person said this included deliberate troublemaker who feels entitled. Now that's not specifically a middle-aged white woman, but the example that this person gave of this used the word she. So maybe they think all Karens are women. But the last one said, person who is offended by everything and needs to speak to the manager all the time, making the situation uncomfortable and inconvenient to other people. And the example, which if I could see my non-whole screen, I would be able to read to you. The example was something like, this horrible person came into the store and wanted to return a shirt that had already been worn a month after buying it. And when I said no, he demanded to speak to the manager. What a Karen. And that is not, I don't believe, standard usage. That's only, the usage of certain students. But notice that they have generalized this pejorative term used only about middle-aged white women, or perhaps older ones, to all people who are obnoxious, which I think is very interesting. So let me tell you a little bit about this collection. 500 plus items that class members submitted, and it's available for download. If you send me an email to monroe@ucla.edu, I will be more than happy to send you a copy of this if you'd like to read the whole thing. I do warn you that there is some bad language in there. So here are the top 10 expressions from the Linguistics 1 submitters, with the number of submitters for each one. I included this here. I know probably most of you don't know all of these words, but I just wanted you to see that for the word cap and no cap, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later, you can see that 81 people out of the almost 500 people that responded to my request for items, 81 of them included this word cap or some form of it. So you can see this is a very, very popular word, and you'll hear more about it later. Oh, I did want to mention that in a tie between 6 and 7 was the word fire, which means something really good. You probably are familiar with these Liberty Mutual commercials. This is a new one, which I am very fond of because I am a rabid knitter. And in this commercial, the guy on the left shows the guy on the right this pair of shoes that he has knitted. And the guy on the right says, dude, those are so fire. And I wouldn't have known what this meant if I had not just recently completed this project. Here are my 5 favorite new items from this year. So there's drippy, meaning very fashionable. You're looking drippy with that watch and necklace on. Would you have ever thought that drippy was a word that would mean very fashionable? I mean, it's really bizarre to me. Gucci means good or okay. I told her it was all Gucci and she could put the taser away. Mood or big mood, which means either I can relate or I agree or I understand. This quarter is such a pain, and you can respond to that. Mood, meaning I agree, I can relate. Sadness Everdeen, which won't mean anything to you unless you saw or read the Hunger Games movies. But I really like it. That means, oh dang, that's too bad. I left my car keys in the apartment and I have to go back and get them. Oh, sadness Everdeen. And one that we can all use, UCLA, University of Zoom, Los Angeles. We are not going to UCLA because all classes are remote. So that's a really good one, I think. Okay, let's talk about making a slang dictionary. So making a dictionary, any dictionary, is hard work. You not only have to collect all the words, but you have to decide on a consistent format, which means more than just how you want the final form of the dictionary to look. That's the easy part. You also have to decide on a consistent way. Each definition will be formulated, and this is the hard part. So here are 3 important principles that the student editors in my slang classes making dictionaries worked with. So first of all, the entry words and phrases should appear in the simplest possible form. So this means, for instance, that a verb that can occur in the form cap should be listed as cap rather than as capped or capping. Sometimes the simplest possible form may be longer than just its most important word. So some expressions are kind of like idioms. Definitions should be words or phrases that can be used exactly the way the word defined can be used. So this is what we call the principle of substitutability. So there's some exceptions. So for instance, verbs are often defined in a dictionary with to in front of the verb. So cap might be, if cap was a definition, you might say to cap, which certainly doesn't appear in all uses of these verbs. And then there's some things like interjections or exclamations, which can't really be defined, but have to be listed with a description of how or when they're used. So the students in Linguistics 1 were asked to submit 3 slang expressions, each with the simplest form of the entry word, a definition that means the same thing, and an example showing how the word could naturally be used in a conversation. So we'll look at some expressions submitted by Linguistics 1 class members that illustrate ways to deal with entries that pose problems for these 3 basic principles that I just told you. So these are issues that student editors have to deal with in every slang dictionary project. And some cases obviously involve problems with more than one of the 3 principles. So I want to say that because I'm going to be using actual examples that they gave and talking about, in a sense, what's wrong with them, how they can be improved, I put this new note in the class lecture that I gave to the Linguistics 1 class after I had put together their words into a slang dictionary. So learning how to write accurate definitions takes training and practice. If your contribution is quoted here, all that means is that the entry as submitted needs work. I was very, very glad to get every entry submitted, and all of them have expanded the coverage of this quarter's mini dictionary and also what I know about slang. So principle A, entry words and phrases should appear in the simplest possible form. So here's what somebody gave as one of their submissions. Let's mob. That was what they said was the slang expression in its simplest form. Definition, let's leave, implying that we will leave or travel as a group. Example, that dinner was good. Let's mob back to the apartment now. So this is the whole thing that the person gave. And it's really very parallel because the definition, the suggested entry, let's mob, and the example all match. Each of them contains let's. But here's another submitted example from another student. Let's get everyone together and then we'll mob. This uses the same verb, but there's no let's, which suggests that the entry word should be simply mob. I'm going to ask you, Lam, if you could unmute people, or maybe I can ask people to unmute themselves if they decide they want to talk. And if you want to say anything, can you please put it in the chat? I see there's a couple things here in the chat. Okay. Not anything we need to talk about right now. Boy, I wish I could fix this. So I'm going to try one more time, you guys. I'm really sorry.
So I've unmuted people in the chat, and they can unmute themselves now if they would like to add anything.
Okay.
Professor Munro, I think there might be a little box in the top, should be at the top, in the top right corner.
Not showing when I had it on full screen. So let me, let's see. You're right. Maybe if I fix it while I'm not in full screen. No, that's full screen, so I don't want full screen. Exit full screen. Let's hope that that works. I'm going to share my screen again, and I apologize for the interruption. Nope, I can't get rid of it. So the little box doesn't seem to be visible to me, Lam, when I'm in, and I don't see, when I look on the more of all the things that are possible, there is nothing. I said don't use share screen, but I mean full screen, but it seems to feel that that's all I can do. So I'm going to do the best I can here. Oh, this is sorry. So there's another example that I talked about. Let's get everyone together and then we'll mob. Now, leave was a sentence that a verb that we could substitute into the first sentence. Into the second sentence. Let's get everyone together and then we'll leave. But you can't substitute it into the example that we have here up under example. That dinner was good. Let's leave back to the apartment. So what this shows is that a definition with go is better than one with leave. I hope everybody agrees with that. So here's just a note. One of the things that you have to decide about format. Most of the students that worked with me on making dictionaries decided that they wanted verbs to have a definition with to. So mob would be defined as something like to go. Not all of them felt that way, but that was the conclusion. And in this handout, or in this talk, I'm going to be putting 2 on verb definitions. So here's another one, spilling tea. So to talk about gossip or drama. Yesterday, my roommate was spilling tea about what happened at the party. So the definition is in the form of a verb definition beginning with to, and the example includes the form of the entry, although the complete verb phrase in the example, the part that means talked, was spilling tea, not spilling tea. And so you can't really put to talk about into the sentence. We can't say yesterday my roommate was talk about. So many other submitted entries include a different form such as spill the tea, what happened? And this suggests that the best form for the entry is probably spill tea or spill the tea, not spilling tea. Okay, caked up. This is a slang term that is used to describe a person who appears to have a large behind. The word cake as a slang term is synonymous with someone's buttocks. The dude that just walked out of the gym must have hit some squats because sheesh, he's all caked up. So the way the definition is phrased makes it hard to see what kind of word we're dealing with. Maybe an adjective, could we define it as having a large behind? But what about that all? If we assume that both the is and the all of the example are part of the expression, we can list it as a verb, be all caked up, and define it as to have a large behind, maybe. So when be is included in an entry, the corresponding word used in an example can, of course, be any form of this word. Any form of the verb be can be used in a verb that's defined as a verb with be. So now we're going to talk about more about principle B, which is including extra things in the example. So the word slay, I'm going to look at 2 different submissions for slay. So one person said the word was slay, and they defined it as, this is more in response to someone describing something that another person did amazingly or looked really cool doing. It's a compliment to someone's actions or appearance. It's similar to good, like when a person says, you did so good or you look so good. Oh my God, you guys slayed out there tonight. So it looks as though the person's definition is defining you guys slayed rather than the basic term slay. So a definition for slay might be to do good or to look good. So we could, that would fit for this particular use of slay. But here's another one. So the other students said, and there were many others, slay was a popular word. Slay is a verb that means something is amazing or done really well. And the example sentence is, you're slaying it right now in that outfit. So this looks like the same word, and the definition is very similar to the first one, but we can't substitute. So you're doing it good right now. You're looking at good right now. If I have to put these definitions into this example, somehow I have to include that it in the sentence. So what can we do about fixing submission B? Since I can't see you right now, since I'm not looking at your names, if you would like to answer this question, you can either put something in the chat or you can put in the chat that you'd like to answer. I can't see raised hands right now. Is there somebody who'd like to do that? What can we do to this? We can change the submitted word. We can change the definition. Probably it's the same thing we said before, to do good or to do amazingly well, something like that. And we don't want to change the example. So how can we fix this? Anybody? Okay. I'm going to answer my own question.
Sorry, Professor. We do have Rick. He says comes from kill or killing it.
Perhaps that's true. I'm wondering how we can fix this entry though. I think you're right, Rick. That's a really good point, that maybe it has something to do with, so you're slaying it right now might be similar to you're killing it right now. How can we fix this? What this person wanted to do was to say the word was slay, and the definition is something like it's amazing, or it's really good, or you're to be amazing, or to be really, really good. Can anybody think of how we can fix this? Okay, I'm gonna answer my own question because I don't want to take too much time on this. We have to change this entry so that it isn't the same as the other entry, which was slay. So remember that the other entry was, you guys slayed out there tonight. This person doesn't say, you guys slayed it out there tonight, which they might have, but they didn't. So in this one, when you say you're slaying it right now in that outfit, the it has to be part of the slang expression. So we have to change the entry word here. We'll leave the other one as slay, but this entry word has to be slay it, which means about the same as slay, but it's different because it's got that it in it. Does everybody see what I'm sort of trying to get at here? I'm trying to make the definition be something that we can substitute into the example. And if the example has slay it, then that it, unless we are saying that that it has a specific meaning, but it looks like that it, as in killing it, doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't refer to anything specific. It's just part of the example. How much time do I have?
As much as you want.
Okay, well, I am just going to keep going then, and you can cut me off when you like. I have a few more of these things to talk about. If it gets to be too long, I will quit them, but this one is sort of cute. So this person submitted the word flop era. Definition: a time in a person's life when things are not going their way. And her example, I'm assuming this is a her, I just got rejected from my third internship and spilled coffee on my favorite sweater. I guess I'm just in my flop era. So we can't substitute the suggested definition into the example sentence. We can't say, I guess I'm just in a time in a person's life. It seems like the am in my of the example sentence, the am, maybe the just isn't part of it, or maybe the just is part of it too, is part of the expression. So the listing probably has to include the verb be, and most likely the expression could be used about somebody other than the speaker. You could say probably something like, she's just in her flop era. I've put this in these little brackets to show that that's not documented for a UCLA student. I just made that up, but it's probably okay. So the listing should probably include the word one's. So probably the best entry word is probably to be in one's flop era. But what would the definition be? I can call on you if you will just say, put in the chat something like call on me, or if you raise your hand, Lamb may see. Okay, well, I would say that probably the best definition would be something like to be at a time in one's life when things are not going one's way, something like that. I mean, so this has to be a sort of verbal expression if we assume that it includes the be, that you can't use flop era in other ways. You might think that there might be other ways you could use flop era, not in this verbal expression, but all I had to go on was student submissions. And I think there were 2 of them that submitted flop era, and both of their examples were very similar to this one. I'm going to skip this one. Principle C, definitions should be words or phrases that can be used exactly like the word defined. So I'm going to go to this next one, which is rent-free. So the slang phrase rent-free is used for when you can't stop thinking about a situation, person, or thing. So the example was, my boyfriend lives rent-free in my head. So this is a tricky one that combines both principles B and C. So principle C is the substitution principle. Principle B means sometimes you have to include more than just the most important word in your entry in the dictionary. So it's tempting to write the definition as something like to obsessively think about, when you can't stop thinking about a situation, person, or thing. But if you look at the example, the person who lives rent-free is not the boyfriend. I mean, it's not the person who's doing the thinking. It's not the speaker, the one that has the head. It's actually the boyfriend. So when you realize that, you might come up with the definition more like to be hard to get out of one's head. So the entry then has to be longer than just rent-free, an adverb. Probably it should be something like to live rent-free in someone's head. Now, if anybody has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat and I will get to it. I know that Marina had a question, and we're going to get back to Mob, Marina. Steve, I don't think your question is a question.
No.
Oh, okay, this is the one I wanted. So BDE. So the definition was one who has a sexy confidence without being cocky. And the example is, I don't know what she likes about him. He's not even cute. He must have BDE. So the example shows that this term does not refer to a person, but rather to a quality that that person has. So the submitter explained BDE as saying that it meant big dick energy. I'm sorry, I was told to warn you about offensive language. So a better definition might be something like sexy confidence without being cocky. So you can see just by what we've gone over that the students, who certainly were doing their very best to follow my directions, were having trouble making definitions that actually define the term. Sometimes people write little books telling you, what the circumstances would be when you would use an expression. Sometimes they sort of turn it around. So in both the last one, the one about rent-free, and this one, the definition seems to be kind of the opposite of what the word actually means as you figure out when you look at the example. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about acronyms. A word like BDE is usually called an acronym. So it's a word that's formed from the initials of its component words, or maybe its most important component words. But English actually has two types of such words, which I teach my students to distinguish. There are true acronyms like NATO or AIDS, which are words that where you take the initials and then you actually pronounce the initials as a word. And then there are initials or alphabetisms like UCLA or HIV, in which the separate initials are pronounced separately. So to distinguish these, in our work, we write initialisms with periods, which is why you may have been wondering why I wrote UCLA with periods, which does not follow university style. The reason that I did it is because I wanted to show you that that means that we say UCLA. So presumably BDE is pronounced BDE with periods, and so that's the way it appears in the mini dictionary. So acronyms can change their pronunciation in two ways. So when my father graduated from UCLA many years ago, students pronounced the name UCLA, which I'm not writing without periods, with periods, as UCLA. So my father graduated in '33, and back then people called UCLA UCLA, which is a true acronym. We're pronouncing the U like the pronunciation of the letter U. That's why I wrote YOU. And UCLA is currently pronounced as a true acronym in Spanish, not English. So a more recent example that I've actually collected, FOB, newly arrived immigrant or person who came from another country, which comes from fresh off the boat, is only a true acronym for students who I've talked with relatively recently. It wasn't actually in this year's group, so I don't know whether they're still using it, but was only pronounced as an initialism, FOB, when I first heard this word over 30 years ago. So they can change their way in both directions, as you see from the FOB and UCLA examples. Another interesting type of slang expression is what we call reverse initialisms. in which people make up possible sources for existing acronyms like under construction, like always for UCLA. You've probably heard that one, and it certainly is, it continues to be true. I think I got that one maybe 15 years ago, but it never stops. And UCLA students have heard a lot of those referring to USC. The most famous one is probably University of Spoiled Children, but there are many, many others. Okay, slaps. Definition, something that is really good. I always grab dinner from Chipotle because the food there slaps. And we can't substitute. We can't say the food there is something that is really good. Even advanced linguistics majors often have trouble coming up with substitutable definitions for words like slap or suck or smack, which I gave you an example of earlier. So the definition above is a noun phrase, something that is really good, but the food there, something that is really good, as I said, doesn't work. So other suggested definitions were very good and of the highest quality, but the food there, very good, doesn't work in standard English either. So in the submitted entry in the example, slaps has an S ending, and the past form is slapped, as in the music last night slapped. I was dancing the entire time. In fact, people have told me that slap refers primarily to either food or music. So this means that slap is a verb because it can take both the S and the ED endings, not a noun or an adjective. So the definition must be something like to be very good. So now we get back to mob, and Marina put something in the chat that I didn't see for a while, but I will read it now. She said, should the definition be to go as a group? And yeah, that's a fine addition, Marina. I didn't add it when I was talking about it, but so earlier we defined this as to go with a group of people, or Marina's to go as a group. But here are some additional sentences. So let's mob BFIT after dinner. Then we can mob your room to watch Euphoria. Hey, we should mob Target later. Yo, who's trying to mob Denev after practice? These sentences don't work with go. They need a different definition. Anybody want to suggest what the different definition would be? You can shout it out if you want. Anybody have an idea of something that would substitute for mob in these three examples? We can't say, then we can go your room, or we should go Target later, at least not in regular English. Who's trying to mob Denev?
What about
Visit.
gather?
Suggest visit.
Well, visit would work, but maybe there's something that's a little closer to go. What do you think? It doesn't have to be a single word, remember.
Go to.
Exactly.
Stop by. Stop by.
Well, go by would work maybe for, actually all of these suggest to me that the people are going to spend some time in this destination. If you're going to go to somebody's room to watch a whole TV show, you probably wouldn't, well, at least I wouldn't use go by there. Maybe for some people go by is good, but I like go to. And sure, visit is possibly another good one. But an important thing to realize is that a definition does not have to be a single word. So that's probably a good point to remember. So I think you see how tricky editing a slang dictionary is. So here are some additional issues. Some of the definitions in our mini dictionary are themselves written in slang. So you remember I had a definition earlier for dope where I said the definition that had been suggested was cool or awesome. I think that those are relatively old words. I've probably been getting them since the very first time I started collecting these things, but to me, cool and awesome are still slang words. So I would rather have a definition that, you know, used more conventional non-slang words that everybody would agree were non-slang, because definitions written in slang limit the readership of who could understand the dictionary and may become dated quickly so that even fluent slang speakers might not understand them in a few years. So student editors have generally tried to rephrase those in standard English. If you study the mini dictionary, if you write to me and I send it to you, you will certainly find some words that you don't think are probably slang. Now, you might be wrong about some of these. They might be reintroduced old slang words, but I think probably there are definitely some words in there, quite possibly suggested by people who were not completely fluent speakers of English. What I said in my directions to non-native speakers of English, I said, if you don't feel comfortable doing this yourself, go out and talk to another student about slang words, because everybody likes to talk about slang words. And this is really what I have discovered. Most people who clearly seem to be non-native speakers of English submitted perfectly fine things. So many words would be eliminated by the student editors. And some words may strike you as likely to be offensive to some people or in some contexts. And student editors often choose to mark such words as potentially offensive. So studying grammar in a secondary school English class, which is these days almost never done, can be artificial and boring because the teacher probably would rather talk about literature, which is not me, as you've probably gathered. So it can be more fun to figure out grammatical principles by analyzing actual language like real slang in use by class members. So even such arcane grammatical lore as the difference between intransitive and transitive verbs, that's those that don't have objects and those that do have objects, which those are two words that usually strike terror into the hearts of most people. Intransitive and transitive. Very, very few people on the street know what they mean, but they've all heard them and they hate them. But it might become more interesting if you look at examples like these. These are not from this year's group. I had an example from there, but I like this one better. From the last UCLA slang volume published in 2009. Score is an intransitive verb, which you've probably all heard. I saw you walk into your room with a chick last night. Did you score? And then tax, very appropriate in this coming weekend, is a transitive verb that you may not know in this meaning, and I'm not sure it's still used, but he wants to tax her. So score and tax both refer to the same thing, but one of them takes an object and one doesn't. And so that's a sort of more exciting way to study transitivity. Slang words like standard English words can be used in many ways. So consider cap, which I said I was going to talk about. It has 4 definitions that I came up with, looking at students' examples, illustrating 4 different parts of speech. So don't cap, bro. I know you ate my pizza slice. That the definition there is to lie, which is an intransitive verb. That's a cap. The definition there is lie, a countable noun. Dog, that's literally so cap. The definition there is false, an adjective. And Nick always talks so much cap. The definition there is something like bullshit or trash, an uncountable noun. Isn't it more fun to analyze slang than just to talk about grammar? And that's it. There's my list of references. And I'd love to hear more questions. The first one I will talk about is from Betty. Betty suggested crowd as another word that we could use to define mob when we defined it as to go or possibly go by or visit. I don't think I can use crowd that way. Let's crowd target. But if I understood, Betty, what you were doing when you wrote crowd, but maybe some people can. But that sounds like to me that would be a slang expression, probably. Steve,
Well,
have a comment?
I was struck by the similarity of something else we deal with here, and that's Spanglish, which is a form of slang, and like slang is very rich and varied. Somebody I know has written a book about this, man named Ilya Stavins, who is a Spanish-speaking professor who loves Spanglish. And he thinks it's very rich and it really illustrates concepts of the evolution of language. But I think you're a cheat. I think you're teaching profound things in a humorous way, and that's just a wonderful thing.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not positive I would agree that Spanglish is slang. That's an interesting question. Do you think Spanglish is English slang or Spanish slang?
Well, I mean, I never thought about that.
Well, I mean, I think Spanglish is more likely to be understood by Spanish speakers than English speakers. So if it is a variety of slang, it's probably a variety of Spanish slang. But see, I think Spanglish illustrates the mixture of two languages, which is not really the same as slang. I agree with the guy that wrote the book you wrote. I mean, you mentioned, I love Spanglish and I think it's great. But it can offend a lot of people. So maybe it has that in common with slang. So many prescriptive Spanish speakers are very offended by Spanglish. They think, you know, people are doing awful things with their beautiful language. And I had the difficult experience once of writing a dictionary with a collaborator who was a native speaker of a variety of Zapotec. And we wanted it to have definitions in both English and Spanish. And so I hired a couple of UCLA undergraduates to write the Spanish definitions. And unfortunately, there are things that we had another speaker who came on later who corrected a lot of things that were clearly Spanglish in these definitions. But I don't think she caught all of them. And so this is a published dictionary that has, you know, a very formal dictionary that has some Spanish definitions written in Spanglish. Okay, I see that Rick asks, has tax, the word that meant have sex with, replace tap? And that I cannot tell you. Because I didn't collect slang from UCLA students between 2009 and this year, I can't tell you if I would have continued to get tax volunteered by students. My guess is that tap probably had a longer shelf life than tax and was used at the same time. So no, I don't think it replaced it. And so Diane and Alan say, how does the student respond to the trickiness or pickiness of making an entry? Are they annoyed, or does it just go along with their need to learn? So I didn't give them feedback, individual feedback on their submissions to me. The way it worked was, this was a class with 500 students and more than 490 sent me emails. Most of them with 3 and some of them with up to 8 slang expressions in them, each exactly like the ones that we saw here. So the submitted entries, the definitions and the examples in each of the things we discussed were from submissions from those classes, not edited at all, except possibly for English spelling. I didn't send them feedback on their entries because, first of all, you can imagine how much time it took just to read and copy these things into my dictionary, my growing dictionary file, and later to edit it when I had, probably at least 550 emails, because sometimes I would write back to them and ask them for clarifications. I did not try to edit their entries or, to make suggestions to them. I only asked them questions. In the slang classes, where in fact we do go into a lot of detail about talking with them about entries that they have suggested or that they've collected from friends, following these basic principles, they learn a huge amount of, the students in those classes, there were usually about, between 8 and 20 of them in those classes when we did the actual hardcore editing. And they got very, very good at it. And, they were willing to discuss these things. They wouldn't have gone on with this. It was a follow-up quarter to the first class where we just sort of talked about slang generally. And they wouldn't have signed on for the second quarter if they hadn't known that they would be doing this kind of very picky work. I think probably the students who I whose examples I picked to discuss in this lecture I gave to them. I tried to make it very clear that I was just showing them the kinds of things that we would do in a class discussion, and not trying to make them feel bad or anything. And I had no names attached to anything. I mean, I had their names on their emails, but I didn't look at their names after getting their emails and reporting them to the professor that they had done this assignment. So I never knew who they were. So I don't think they were annoyed. So Diane and Alan asked another question: who does the compilation editing a whole of the dictionary definitions suggested? So the whole group, when it's a student group making a dictionary, the whole group participates in all the discussion, with me kind of trying to Socratically guide them in, learning about what we're doing. But, if they felt strongly about a phrasing or something like that, that was what we went with. So it's not, they weren't assigned specific things, and they weren't a team. And even there in those classes, there were never any names on the things. Sometimes a student would say, I submitted this and I feel this way about it, but they were basically anonymous. So I have another question from Daniel. Are styles of usage slang in that space is used to mean topical area in recent times? A few years ago, academics answered all questions by starting with so. I don't know about academics, sure sounds like Elizabeth Warren to me. Isn't that the way Elizabeth Warren answers all questions? I think she often says so. Intentional is now used to mean deliberate. Daniel, I wouldn't call any of those slang. In that space maybe might be jargon. Jargon is a word for words or phrases that are associated with a particular group, or a particular profession or something like that. That might be jargon. The other two, well, intentional, I think that's just changing meaning, and I don't think it really has to do with, I think that's just evolution of language. The one about academics and answering all questions by starting with so, I wouldn't really call that jargon, and I certainly don't think I would call it slang. I think you're right in calling it style of speech. Let's see. Victoria, have you ever heard the slang term throat? I'm told it's short for cutthroat. It refers to a person who is studious, as that person is such a throat. No, I have never heard that. That's really interesting. Other questions or comments?
There's a couple of questions that were earlier in the chat. Tom Hennebush.
Oh, maybe I missed that.
Yeah, Tom asked, have you, well.
Oh, I
Tom,
did.
can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
No, I can read Tom's question. Tom is a former colleague. I mean, we are former colleagues. Pam, have you considered etymology? That is adding that to the slang dictionary. For instance, cap comes from crap. I hadn't thought of cap coming from crap, and I'm not sure I agree with that. But yeah, in our dictionaries, we do give, in the dictionaries where I work with students, there's definitely etymologies. I don't have very many etymologies in the mini dictionary, which again, if you're curious about it, you can certainly write to me for a comment or a copy. I will be happy to send it to you. Just because it's 31 pages long, edited down from like 89 from the 550 emails. I didn't include all of the examples that they gave. Some of them, like cap, had 81 people who suggested it. It's a very, very common word. in slang, and there were oodles and oodles of things. Michael says, who do I think was the first Karen? She sounds like a difficult person. I personally would guess that the people who started using this word probably didn't have a person in mind. Apparently, if you look at popular baby names, this must have been a popular baby name in like the 50s or early 60s, because apparently it is a common name for the of women of the age that people think Karens are. I just think so incredibly hurtful to all the wonderful, nice people named Karen. I would never, ever use this word myself, but apparently a lot of people do. So Marina says Spanglish is a dialect. What do you think it's a dialect of, Marina?
I think it's a dialect of English. I belong to a Russian-speaking community, and we have similar inclusions of English words in the Russian or Russian words in an English speech when people can't find an adequate substitution to their thoughts. So I don't think Spanglish would be a slang, because slang to me has certain connotations, and Spanglish does not all the Spanglish expressions would be colored. It's just a combination of words.
I don't agree with you that it's a dialect of English. I don't know how much Spanglish you've heard, but if you don't know Spanish, I don't think you'll understand much Spanglish. What you are talking about, I think, when you talk about English and Russian using words, is what linguists technically call code switching, which is taking two languages and substituting words from one language into the other. So if you're talking English and you sprinkle Russian words in, talking to somebody who knows Russian, basically another bilingual speaker, then it's a variety of English that is code switching into Russian. If you're speaking Russian and you use English words in it, it's a variety of Russian that people would say it's like not pure Russian or something like that. But the thing about Spanglish, which I'm sure Steve knows, but maybe not everybody knows, Spanglish has particular grammar. It's really a variety of Spanish because they use mostly Spanish words. They do put in some English words without changing them, but they do incredible things to the Spanish words. For instance, if they want to borrow an English verb into Spanish, they'll take the English verb and then they put the Spanish ending AR, which marks it as a Spanish first conjugation verb, onto the end of it, and then they conjugate it like a Spanish verb. So one of my students once was talking about when she was visiting her relatives in Mexico, and they were playing a video game, and she was sitting behind the person that had the controls, and she wanted him to shoot these bad guys on the video screen. And she said, "Chutealos, chutealos," which means shoot them. If chutear is a good Spanish verb, she's inflected it like a normal Spanish verb. And I'm not even sure that an English speaker, they would recognize the word shoot, but they wouldn't know why all this stuff was going on. So I think that Spanglish is interesting, the way Steve was talking about, precisely because it is a variety of, it's not just code switching, it's massaging English words so that they become more like Spanish words, often adding, vowels onto the end of English words so that they will work more like Spanish masculine and feminine nouns and stuff like that. So I think that we do need to distinguish between something like Spanglish, which is really an amazing variety of speech, and code switching between two languages, which is, perfectly legitimate, even though some people look down on it.
Well, Pam, Spanglish is hard. My wife, who's absolutely fluent in English and Spanish, would have difficulty with Spanglish because it's not an everyday conversation thing with her.
Yeah.
She would have to adapt to it before she was comfortable with it.
I do believe it's easier to understand if you're a speaker of Spanish than a speaker of English, though.
Well, yes, yeah.
Okay. So Valerie says, do slang expressions differ in different parts of the country? How fast does it take slang words to become part of the mainstream? So I'll answer the second part first. I have no idea. Many slang words never become part of the mainstream or never cease to be felt as slang. And really not many of the words that you don't already know that are in this collection from this year are ever going to become mainstream. That really doesn't happen all that much. But let me go back to the Valerie's first question. Do slang expressions differ in different parts of the country? I said really all I study is college slang. I mentioned this woman, Connie Ebley, who is now also retired like me, who got me into this because I met her at a conference and she told me about how she collected slang expressions from her students in English classes at UNC Chapel Hill. That was, I think, probably it was in the late summer of 1983, and that was when I first started collecting, or it might have been in 1982 that I met her. Anyway, she and I have done some small comparisons which suggest that slang words are more likely to originate on the West Coast and to travel east. So I got them at UCLA before she got them at UNC. There are certainly differences in different parts of the country. I think there are a lot of college slang expressions that are pretty common in colleges all over the country, but certainly a lot of the UCLA slang expressions are probably not things that people at other schools would understand. Okay, so Diane and Alan say, I think the first Karen was the woman in Central Park who got upset with a man who spoke to her about what she was doing with her dog. She accused him and even tried to get him in trouble. She lost her job because of it. I believe her name was Karen. Oh, that's interesting. So Jonathan says, not a question, but a suggestion. Radiotopia has a wonderful podcast of fiction called The Truth. The latest episode is entitled Dan's Slang. You might find this story worth your time. And Steve says that Diane and Alan are right about the origin of Karen. So that's good to know. Any other questions out loud or in the chat?
So the summer that incident occurred in in the park in New York, there were some articles, and I'm going to go back into my file, but I'm at the wrong computer, where they did trace the origin of the word Karen. And if I find it out, we've got your email address, I will send it to you, can share.
Okay. You know, it may have been in the Wikipedia article I quoted from. There is a Wikipedia article called Karen, which has this definition that I quoted part of earlier. And there's a lot of other things. I mean, apparently a prototypical Karen has a particular type of hairstyle, which I was unfamiliar with. And I mean, they have a picture of a prototypical Karen, a drawing, not to have a real person's picture. And so it may be that they address the question of where Karen come from. So that's interesting to know.
Possible, yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Pam, going back to your word drippy, which I don't have the example in front of me, so I can't reconstruct the whole thing, but for me, the word drippy seems to have at least some negative sense associated with it. Maybe because of its alliterative association with the word dopey. But if I'm right about drippy having some negative connotation, would this not be an example of something negative becoming something positive?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Was your example.
That's absolutely, that's what I said. I mean, I said.
Okay, all right, I missed that then.
I said, let's see if I can, what I said was, let me find that slide.
Well, I'm thinking too of your statement about negative words becoming positive in
Right.
slang. Lots
And-
of examples of that.
Right,
You
and
said
it's
you didn't-
drippy is an example of that.
Okay, all right. I missed that then. Thank
So
you.
what I'll read it to you. An especially common type of change is for a word that names a negative concept in standard language to acquire a positive connotation in slang. So in addition to sick and dank, which were two of the ones on where I showed rapid changes of meaning, current examples include bad. I mean, that's very old as a positive word, disgusting, drippy, sickening, and tough. So yeah.
Yeah, I missed that. Thank you.
No problem. And that is a, it just seems to be a very common thing, that a way to make up a new slang expression is to take a word that has a negative connotation and to use it in a positive way. So an older one that I don't know that people are using it anymore is, for instance, wicked. So, you know, wicked, I think in standard language is not a positive word. But in slang, it can either be an adjective or it can be an adverb, meaning, you know, something strongly positive. So, you know, saying like that's wicked good or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? I think I've got, oh, there's Diane and Alan who wrote so many good messages.
Oh, I really, really liked your examples of using slang to teach grammar. How is that getting out to the teaching community?
Well, I think you'd have to have somebody like me who was really devoted to grammar to do it. I will tell you guys about an experiment that I participated in one time, which made me a little bit less sanguine about whether this would really work. I have a friend who just retired from teaching linguistics at Cal State Northridge, and she had a student in one of her classes who was a teacher, an English teacher at Culver City High School. And one summer, she was teaching 2 semesters of remedial 9th grade English. So people who had to repeat 9th grade English, either 1 semester or 2, either the first or the second or both, because they had failed it. Now, this was probably not the best group to try an experimental thing on. My friend that was the teacher persuaded this woman, who was wonderful and gave me enormous respect for people who teach 9th grade English, persuaded her to let us come into her class once or twice a week and do a brief lesson about slang to try to help them understand more about grammar. And so I collected slang expressions from these guys, and I talked about, you know, how you could analyze them as according to their parts of speech. And one thing I learned was that if you're teaching remedial 9th grade English, you can only talk about one subject for at most 20 minutes at a time. They need really, really, really small chunks of stuff. And this made it hard. I mean, we had fun, and I think they may have enjoyed, you know, talking about slang expressions, but I'm not really sure how much they learned. We did a little post-test, and I'm not really sure how much they learned about grammar. It is a dream I have. Maybe it's only like an advanced placement class that might find this a good way to study grammar. I just feel people should learn more grammar in school, which is something they learn almost nothing about anymore. But I think I'm kind of a minority, but thank you for your comment.
There was a question from Steve. What do you think about Simon Winchester's book on the compilation of the OED? Is it in any way true to life?
I don't think, I mean, it's been a long time since I read it. I don't think that the way the OED is compiled is, has a very historical focus. So they try to get what they call attestations of words from as many different periods and as many different genres and stuff as possible. Based on those, then they figure out what the definitions should be. And if we focus on just one genre and one period, figuring out definitions based on that, then in fact, I think what we did in our slang classes where we were making slang dictionaries is actually very similar, because what we were doing was looking at attestations, meaning examples that were judged by the student speakers of slang who I was working with to be natural uses, and trying to figure out definitions of them which fit my three basic principles, which I think are similar to the principles that the OED and other mainstream dictionaries use. The one thing that I think is different is that, you remember we talked some about sort of idiomatic expressions that have more than one word, like live rent free in one's head. Most mainstream dictionaries don't include multi-word expressions. You find them in collections of idioms and things like that, but not in dictionaries usually. I'll give you another example, which all of you who are listening who are non-native speakers of English will, I think, really be able to relate to. One of the things that's very difficult for people in learning English is that when you learn a verb, you have to learn what prepositions are used after that verb. And, why do we believe in something rather than believing on something, for instance? We have to learn that you use the word in with believe, but most dictionaries will not tell you that. Most, dictionaries meant for native speakers. This is why there are dictionaries for learners that make a big deal about telling you what prepositions to use with different verbs, and those are very useful. That's similar to the kind of thing that we would use, that we would put in one of my dictionaries, because it's something that seems important to me, but it might not be to everybody. Any other questions? Okay, I will say thank you so much for inviting me to talk. If you get more ideas or questions or comments and want to email me, my email, as several people have put in the chat. Here's an interesting thing. Daniel is making a comment about this preposition issue. He says students say based off rather than based on. And yes, I have heard that. And it almost seems like slang, although I'm not sure that I would call it slang when it's just a difference in the preposition, but it may be just younger speakers, not just, UCLA students, but that's a really good example of another thing that is an interesting change in language. So I want to say thank you again. It was really delightful chatting with all of you, and have a good rest of your day.
Pam, it's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you
So much,
all.
Professor.
Bye-bye,
And-
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Pam's dictionary is available on Amazon. So
It's very old.
yeah.
This is-
I just want to make mention, we have two more programs coming this month. They are right now fully booked, so you'd have to go on a wait list if you want to join us for either Queen Nefertari's Egypt or Mrs. Block's recital, which are both next week. But we do have lots of space left for the Wendy Museum on the Cold War, so coming up in early May. Join us if you can. Thank you so much. Please stay safe.
Bye-bye, everybody.